Hello, my name is Bob Chalker, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of AMP. AMP is a new organization that was formed this year out on January 1st with the merger of NACE International and SSPC, the Society for Protective Coatings, two organizations with a 70-plus year history that have come together. And it's my pleasure to be here today. I do want to welcome you all to our next Access session, Refocus Your Financial Reserves, How to Plan for the Future. I hope you all did enjoy the break in the previous sessions. I don't know about you, but Deidre's talk really got me motivated and was a real wow session for me, and I hope you all found it to be the same. Before we get started, there are a couple housekeeping things I'd like to share with you. There's some technical reminders attached. Just take a look at those. And I will remind you, if you are having technical difficulties, please use the Need Help tab on the platform. We have people staged and ready to go to keep you connected and engaged. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our partner, MCI Group. We would just thank them for their support for CES and for this session in particular. We truly appreciate it. And I'm honored to be your moderator this session. I'm going to be joined by three thought leaders to really discuss how we put our reserves to work for us, particularly post-pandemic. I expect that this session will be a really engaging topic. So I invite all of you to add your comments to the chat session. You can add questions, but also this is a learning session. And I know some of you on this call personally, some of you are in the audience, and you have a lot to add to the conversation. So if you have ideas or thoughts to answer any of the questions, please feel free to add those from the chats. One of the things that I just value so much from CES is the learning that we get from one another. So we very much want to hear that. I think we all know that in order for our organizations to be successful, we need a talented staff, we need engaged volunteers, we need a great strategy, but we also need strong finances. And this afternoon session is focused on how we secure our financial reserves. I'm excited for this session because we have a unique opportunity to hear from the point of views of several key people in leading and managing our organization's financial reserves: the CEO, a controller, a volunteer treasurer, and a professional financial planner who works with many of our organizations. And I think in all of our organizations, we have those people working together to guide us financially. Let me begin by giving each of the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and say a couple opening comments. Tracy, if we could begin with you.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. I'm Tracy Kuntz, president of Townley Capital Management. Townley is an independent investment advisory and fiduciary counseling firm, and we're celebrating our 50th anniversary of serving both institutions and private clients. Throughout our history, we've worked with many nonprofit organizations, and we've developed a specific expertise in working with scientific and engineering societies and associations, and those that want to thrive financially, make a difference in the specific field, and to live forever as an organization. So we've also found that there's a great need among such organizations to strengthen fiduciary practices. So we've developed a program that we call the Fiduciary Edge to help board members and committee members fulfill their fiduciary duties for prudent financial oversight. And this has been a key necessity, especially during the last 18 months. So in the course of our work with these institutions, we're often asked, how much should an organization have in their short-term reserves or long-term reserves? How is the best way to allocate those reserves, and how much can be spent from the reserves to fund new programs? Another question we get a lot is, should we take from the long-term reserves for capital expenditures, such as real estate purchases, or should we refinance? So answering these questions can be significant in engaging the board and management in discussions about the organization's financial future. So I'm really excited to be participating today in this discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Tracy. And Jenny, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Jenny Grant, and I am the controller with the American Society of Civil Engineers. The American Society of Civil Engineers is a nonprofit organization. Membership of civil engineers with over 150,000 members. This afternoon, as a controller, one of my responsibilities is to make sure that our senior management, executive management, and our board is well informed to make the decisions regarding the financial operations of the organization, and to make sure that we have the reserves that we need going forward, and to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. And over the last 15 months, we have been able to sustain ourselves. So that is one thing that the American Society of Civil Engineers and our board has been very good to have, as building the reserves over the years to sustain us during a time as we're about to come through.
Thank you, Jenny. And Maria.
Hi, Maria Lehman. I am the current treasurer of the American Society of Civil Engineers and the president-elect as of October. This will be my 6th stint on the board. I was a director in the 90s, a vice president in the early 2000s, assistant treasurer the last 2 years, treasurer this year, they're 1-year appointments, and then coming on as president-elect. My day job is I am the director of infrastructure for GHD in the United States, a top 30 consulting engineering firm worldwide. And I have to tell you that the rainy day does come. And we had a perfect storm before the rainy day that probably made us less prepared than we should have been. And as we get into the specifics, but what I can tell you is when I was a vice president in the early 2000s, we did have our reserves dip very low because of a lot of issues, including then the recession. And so we learned some things from that, and we'll be talking specifics as we get through.
Very good. Thank you, Maria. Well, as came up in all of your comments, as we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, I don't think there's a hotter topic right now among finance committees, boards, senior staff than asking what's next for our financial reserves. I think for some of us, our reserves served us well. We were well prepared. I think for others, it wasn't so much the case. Some of us used our reserves. Some of us were able to protect them. Probably some dwindled down and some grew. Tracy, you work with a lot of organizations. What's your assessment of how our industry did overall in managing our finances over the last 18 months?
Well, COVID was certainly a catalyst for change among our organizations across the board. And I think as many of you experienced, you had to act quickly, to change the delivery of your products and services and respond to declining, revenue and other threats. So from our perspective, we've actually been impressed by the resiliency of the organizations that we've worked with and heard of, and the ability to actually pivot and to experiment in a fast changing, environment. And that's not always easy to do. What we saw is, kind of once the fires were put out, then, the organization could then shift the focus to surviving. And now with the economy reopening, we see, the organizations are again thriving and actually planning for the future. So, what we saw specifically with our client base is that societies that had ample reserves were really very keen on finding ways to continue to help their members and to deliver the products and services that they had been in the past. And I think what we saw is that, helping the membership, through the pandemic became a major focus point. And, some of the examples that we saw were, allowing members to, let their membership lapse, but still receiving the benefits, providing extra support for students and student-related programs, and enabling members to access papers more easily. So there were a lot of actions that we saw that were taken that, may have been part of the, process anyways, but it just got really refocused on that. Other societies who may not have had ample reserves, they had to tighten up their operating budgets to avoid dipping into the reserves. And then some had to dip into the reserves. And that's really what it's there for. And that was something that really then helped them kind of be a bridge, to this new stage that we're in now. And of course, some were helped by the PPP loans and other government assistance. Business interruption insurance was a great benefit to many of our clients. And then, of course, the V-shaped recovery that we've seen in the market has also, aided it. I think it would have been a very different discussion had the market continued to decline and the reserves, been affected. So if we reflect back over these last 18 months, what are some of the factors that we saw that our clients were able to survive and thrive with? And I think there's really 5. I mean, first, it was a very engaged board of directors that was playing a critical role to the successful response to the COVID environment and giving direction to management. We had one of our societies say at the beginning, the board said, continue to deliver the same services and products that you have been. Do not change, those services. And, we're fine because we've got sufficient reserves, and do not cut back. So that really allowed this organization's management to, innovate and to come up with creative solutions without that constraint of the cost cutting. Second, we saw just strong governance at work. So policies and procedures were in place, and these organizations were able to rely on those in a time of crisis. Third, cash flow planning was super important in the forefront of resiliency. Clients that regularly did multi-year, multi-scenario cash flow planning, were able to weather, the situation better than those who managed with more of a shorter term perspective. Fourth, we had clients that had both operating reserves, which are kind of like the emergency fund, like an individual might have, and then also had the long-term reserves. So again, like an individual saving for retirement, those long-term reserves really came in handy for the organizations. And last, just a disciplined approach to building the reserves that started way before this, pandemic, and that being able to, put their surplus from unrestricted operating funds into that reserve, time after time, really put these organizations in a good position.
Very good. Thank you, Tracy. Sarah, if you would, I think we have a poll that we're going to use to inform an upcoming question. If you could put that up. And then as you're doing that, I want to ask Maria and Jenny a question, since you worked for the same organizations. Well, Tracy noted how important it is to have the engaged board, finance committee, the volunteers. What did you do at ASCE to get your board, your finance committee, to have them engaged and participating in the process, particularly with all their own distractions, that they got their own companies and their own family situations that they were dealing with? How'd you keep them connected?
Let me back up a little bit to, first of all, violently agree with what Tracy said. Okay. And second of all, to talk about, I talked about that perfect storm and how things came together. Basically, we've been having decreasing revenues while we're having increasing expenses. And global sustainability in the project is something that we've taken on, but we really had to start looking at sustainability from a business standpoint. And so even though we already had some issues with those budgets, and we were dipping into not only our investment income, but into our reserves to balance a budget, which is bad fiscal policy, dealing with that, we started looking at, for example, curtailing travel as a function of sustainability and carbon footprint. The beginning of last year. So we were already on that path before we all got shut down. So we were already working towards those kinds of things, both from the staff standpoint and from the volunteer standpoint. So there was a lot more, remote work. We were looking already at remote conferences and things like that. So things that we would have to do 2-3 months later, we were already implementing. So I think that was a positive point. The other thing is again, as we're changing, and no one likes change, right? Only, and not all babies even like change when they get their diapers changed. The issue became, how do we keep people in the loop? And so you start over communicating. There's no such thing as over communicating, letting people know what we're doing, why we're doing it. At the same time, we did an organizational restructuring that we were in the process of prior to COVID. So that it was implemented, which provided us more cost savings. The year that ended, 19, saw an $8 million hit on a $60 million budget. Okay, so we were like all in a really bad place. And so we've put things in place through these communications. We saw incredible collaboration, for example, with our institutes, that when we said, look, we have to cut some of, what we would normally give you as operating support, they got together and decided who of the institutes could afford the cut versus who couldn't. And so it wasn't a broad scale cut. So there was a lot of that going on in the organization because we were telling them. Our president at the time, Guna, used to say, blame it on cousin COVID. And, everybody wants to know how cousin COVID is doing. And so we need to stay out there talking about all the implications. We figured out early that we needed to go for a PPP. We did 2 rounds of it. We had one, the first round has now been made into a grant. And at the same time, we thought about how do you leverage that to our benefit? Okay, so we're in the process of working on the report card for America's infrastructure. I'm on that committee, and I was lead on a couple of the areas. And so what we did, as there was discussion about recovery money, well, we should do a white paper to Congress about what we're doing. And one of the things I said, how many white papers are hitting people's desk? The report card is a brand they know, they understand both from a media and elected. So we actually did a COVID update last June of how COVID was impacting our infrastructure, the revenues, the expenses, all the things that were going into the 16 areas that we had as areas. So we actually use that as a positive to get information out there to start Congress thinking about how we reinvest in our infrastructure. So we tried to find ways to make good out of the mess that we were dealt.
Very good. Thank you.
So, and just to piggyback off what Maria said, keeping the Program and Finance Committee, management, as a part of operations, we kept the governing body informed so that they were could make the decisions that they needed to make as far as the operations of the organization was concerned, and we were able to sustain it.
Very good. One of the things, just to get down to some of the specifics, one of the things we did at AMP, so I am blessed. I have a very engaged finance committee and a board as a tradition throughout, and it's always been good. But as we recognize the severe financial impact, and a lot like ASCE, we saw literally in February, March, April, our revenue went to zero. We had no income. We had an annual conference that was scheduled for March. Most of our income comes from running education courses. It's about bringing people together. And so all of that got shut down. We went into a mode of weekly finance committee meetings and every 2-week board meetings. And we just kept them informed with what was happening every step of the way and engaged them in decision-making. I've been at this 11 years at NACE and now AMP, and we've never asked our board members or finance committee to engage in the way we did through this. And we've been through some good things and big things and also some tough times, but it really required all the smarts that you could get in the room to come up with the right answers. I don't think any of us had the solution. So we just did the poll, and it looks like that the wisdom of our audience is that 6 to 12 months is sort of the size of a reserve, 6 to 12 months of budget expenses. I think that there's always this debate, what's enough, what's too much, are you making good use of your funds? And I'll just put this out to the table. What do you think about that number? Should it be 6 months? Should it be 12 months? Should it be more? I'm curious what you as experts on the panel think.
Well, I'm going to pipe in. If we only had, we are in that around 6 months as far as ASC is concerned.
Right. Yes.
Unfortunately, it was a V. Obviously, conferences and continuing ed was a big hit. Our membership didn't take anywhere near as much as hit as we thought it might, which was very heartening. And our publications really stayed flat, and advertising actually went up, not by much, but that was like a surprise to everybody. but had we not had the big V, we would have been in more trouble. So we're actually looking at revisiting our
Mhm.
board policy is 35% of
Mhm.
our expenses. And so we're gonna take a look at that moving forward, based on where we want to be, because we were not comfortable that we were in a good place.
Right.
So are you looking to increase it then?
Yes.
Take it by when you say
Yes.
you're not comfortable?
Yes.
Yes.
Tracy, what are you seeing? What is that sweet spot for this? And I'll ask you this another way. Do our past beliefs of what we thought was the right
Mhm.
number carry over now with what we learned in the post-pandemic or through the pandemic for us going forward? Where should that number be?
Mhm. Well, I think one of the key things is there isn't a one size fits all, because every organization is different in how the operations run, the risk to revenue, the risk to spending, the, other financial circumstances. So, I mean, as with an individual, I mentioned, having an emergency fund is, we usually say 12 months worth. But it really is dependent on the cash flow timing and all these different factors. So, we've found that, some of our organizations internally do this, like I said, the multi-year, multi-scenario planning. That's not always easy to do. We have some resources that, can help an organization, go through doing kind of a 4-point review, and I'd be happy to send that to anyone else. It's through Grant Thornton. And it's an elaborate process, and I think nobody anticipated a COVID pandemic economic shutdown. So even in the best case scenario of all the risk planning you could do, nobody really anticipated that. But that aside, we know we don't know the future, and we don't know the future of the market or all these risks ahead. And so the best case planning is to have, we would say, at least 12 months, but to try to do, 6 to 12 months, but to try to really do some targeted, cash flow projections and the scenario planning on a very detailed level. And then, again, that having that long-term fund and that disciplined approach to building that is even going to strengthen the financial circumstance of the society even more.
Thinking back to September 11th, and I can remember Rudy Giuliani saying that, did we ever plan on having 2 airplanes fly into the World Trade Center? Absolutely not. But we were prepared for fires and tornadoes and earthquakes and all these things that we were able to bring to play. What were those learnings that any of you had out of the last 18 months? I don't think, as Tracy said, none of us were prepared for this, but we did well. I think as an industry, we did well. And what is it that we did that was prepared us, or that we learned along the way that now is going to help us going into the future to plan better, hopefully never again for something like this, but we don't know what that next crisis will be. We know it's coming, but we don't know what it's going to be. So what have you taken away that you're going to put to use in preparing for the future beyond maintaining a certain size? We've talked about 6 to 12 months, but what else have you learned?
I think the resiliency that we were kind of forced to play in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you what, if we would have talked about remote workforce, 100% of the time, 100% remote workforce for 12 months, and that our, local units and our state units and our institutes were going to do everything electronically for 12 months, even 18 months ago, they would have all told you we were crazy, right? But we found ways to make it an advantage. And I'll give you a great example. The Texas branch of the Houston section for ASCE has been grabbing speakers of world renown that live in Houston. Okay. So Art Fox, former Secretary of Transportation, talked about transportation and how it broke up communities, and that there was, we have to look at that, right? Well, he did this as a local section meeting, which he normally would do. But Houston told the rest of the country, hey, this is like a big deal. And it was like $20 to go electronically. And it was at lunch at your desk. And so even local talks are now international in scope. We had a number of conventions that went virtual, and we saw many more attendees from places we normally don't get. We think about our Montana section. That's a day. if you're just going for a 2-hour meeting because the membership is so dispersed. Well, you can now do regular programming, and we want to get together, but you don't have to get together 100% of the time. So I think it's making us rethink how our delivery model works and how do we do things more effectively and efficiently in the future.
So I'm gonna follow up on that a minute, Maria, because we play in a similar space, the civil engineers, the engineering community. One of the things that this did for us at AMP was we were able to make change in a way we've never been able to make it before, right? The walls, the resistance to change came down. But I remember a conversation with one of our leaders after we had taken all of our education classes remote. And he asked me, well, what's your plan of when we're going to go back to the old way, the way we used to do it? And my answer was, we're not. He didn't like that, but let's just be honest. There is a resistance to change, at least there historically has been, and getting people to accept new ways to do things is difficult. What are you doing at ASCE to help those who want to go back the old ways? They want everybody back in the office. They want to go back to a dinner meeting or a conference that's in person only, or in our case, a class that's just, it's only people sitting in the classroom. How do you help your members that like the old way embrace the new ways?
I think it's pretty simple. I think we're going to do a combination moving forward. I mean, everybody, I did a face-to-face conference last week, and it was awesome to get back with people, right? But I don't think I have to do it all the time. And I'll give you a great example. The board meetings went, like you said, we went from quarterly to having some kind of informal, almost monthly, on everything that's going on, right? So our convention is virtual. We had to make that decision because of contracts and cancellation clauses. But the board meeting is coincident with that, and it was going to be virtual, and the board wants to get together, so we're going to go to Reston headquarters, and everybody's going to pay their own way because we said we're not going to fund it. There would have been a lot more resistance had we not gone through this, right? Because we have a funding model, and so I think a partial funding model. So I think it's changed attitudes because there's a third of our board that's coming off at that meeting and they want to be there for their last meeting. And there's new people coming on that want to be there for their first meeting. So I think we're going to get a lot. I mean, the first person to volunteer is the person that had the furthest to go. He was coming from Hawaii, and he's like, I'm buying the ticket and I'm coming because I want to see people. So, so it's a mix. But, people, again, who would have been more reluctant to do some things are now saying, no, we have to step up and we have to do this. So I think it is going to be a mixed model. And you have to learn that you're not going to keep everybody happy. That's impossible. You'll make yourself crazy trying to do that. And quite frankly, the model we should be looking at is how do we engage our younger members, because they're our future. And quite frankly, they love the all electronic. And quite frankly, us that are on the older end of the spectrum feel like there needs to be more of a face-to-face mentoring piece than they're getting right now. But they'd be fine if we were remote, I think, forever.
Yeah.
So, it's a balance about making sure that you're hitting your target audiences and that you're doing some things to keep everybody, a little happy and a little unhappy at the same time.
Very good. Thank
Right.
you. I'm just going to remind the audience to feel free to ask your questions. I'm happy to take questions from the audience. So we've got a brain trust here of people, or again, add your own comments or thoughts to the questions. Jenny, I'm going to ask you. So obviously, we live in a world full of risks. COVID's just one. There's a lot of others. What are you doing at ASCE to monitor the risks and then to plan for them or to mitigate them in your financial planning?
Base is monitoring our cash flow, monitoring the way we spend, monitoring our revenue stream. So financial reporting to our executive management, to our board, and our program of finance, they receive a very detailed financials and analysis on a monthly basis. Our executive committee, they meet on a monthly basis. So it's just basically keeping everyone informed of everything that's going on within the organization, that is kind of key. And then, like Maria said, any high, we do have a structure of spending. So anything over a certain threshold has to be approved by our executive committee. We have, or our program and finance committee, or even our board. We just recently had our board meeting in July, and we approved our budget for FY22. And I have to say, this was one, even though we're coming out of the pandemic, this budget was one of the easiest budgets to prepare and pass over like 5 or 6 years. Because like Maria said, our revenue stream was going down, but because we were forced throughout those years to make some changes, it better prepared us for what we're going through today.
Very good.
I'm going to add 2 points to what was said. First of all, I had an open invitation to the entire board. We only had 2 board members on program and finance. And so I put an invitation out to the entire board to join us in our budget deliberations and the program area discussions, which is a lot of time. I mean, this is days worth of work. And we had roughly 40% of the board participate. Because, how do you get through a board? You have to have them informed. The other thing I did in January, which was a big hit, is for those board members who don't necessarily read everything in detail because they gloss over when they get 40 pages of spreadsheets. I did a Menti quiz, and I put up a bottle of bourbon and a $50 prize. And Menti showed what the standings look like, right? So I used a little bit of peer pressure on them.
I love it.
And couldn't do it at our finance meeting, at the meeting in July, because we ran out of time. But like, they were all, we want to do this again. This was fun because it's a dry topic to talk to a board about, right?
Well,
so we got them
so
engaged at a level where got their juices flowing about competing over this. And so I think we had a much better educated consumer when we came to the board meeting in July.
Yeah.
Very good. I'm going to go because we have a couple. I'm going to go a little out of order from what we'd set up because we have a couple good questions in the chat, and I want to catch those. So the first one came from Carrie and said, "Would love to." Excuse me. The first one was before that. It came from Chris Wilkie. I'm curious where you are targeting new revenue streams for continued diversification post-COVID. So, Jenny, Maria, but Tracy, if you're seeing some things in your customer base, feel free to do that as well, or chime in as well.
The one thing that we actually started pre-COVID, but really made incredible sense and really gained steam during COVID, is we basically digitized all of our technical data from the 1800s and have both a library and we thought that was really going to be the only major place that was going to buy it, is kind of the libraries getting all the data and having a database and being able to go back. But I mean, it cost us less money. We got to expedite it because a lot of other things were shutting down, and we're bringing in twice the revenue this fiscal year than we anticipated. And we think that's going to continue. So that's an example. There's virtual pieces and being able to, we never recorded our face-to-face things because of the extra costs. When you're doing it virtually, you can record it, and then you have the ability to, for example, in India, where we have a lot of students, but we can't deliver a lot to them because student members don't pay dues. So we have the opportunity to engage them as students to get more involved. So it's provided those kinds of things. And, I gave the example of Houston. We have a whole number of local units or younger member groups or students that are able to take advantage of that. Jenny, can you think of any other examples?
No, I guess we're kind of revisiting our continuing ed and the structure of that department to reach out more to our younger members and doing more things, virtual educational courses versus our in-person ones. So we're doing a big major overhaul on that avenue. And which I think is going to be very successful.
Very good. You know, Maria, you brought up content for us, and we were on that journey as well of digitizing content, content management prior to COVID, but COVID just brought it, made it really real to us. And in the end, we're in the content business, right? We're in the knowledge exchange business, and anything we can do. So we're going to be making a much more accelerated investment into our content management strategy. I'll give another one that sort of came out, and I can say it almost directly came out of COVID, although I think we suspected that there was something there for others. So we were a technical society, and we really looked at our role to help our members from the technical perspective of their profession, teach them how to be better inspectors, teach them how to help their engineering skills, et cetera. Right. When COVID hit, we saw an opportunity, particularly when there was a lot of confusion around the payroll protection plan, because we have a lot of small businessmen. And I had talked to a couple and got the same feedback. They didn't even know they were eligible or knew it was out there. So we put a podcast together, or a webinar together, of a lawyer and a financial person who understood this. They were deep in the payroll protection. They did an incredible job. It was one of the highest attended and most watched after podcast webinars we ever did. That led us, and we got lots of positive feedback on it. So that led us to start to investigate that our role could be bigger for our members. And one of the things we started to investigate is, okay, you come to us for your technical knowledge. Where do you go for your business skill knowledge, your professional knowledge? You know, if you're an independent contractor, how do you learn about writing a business plan or applying for a loan? If you're an individual, how do you learn about interviewing better, or working with spreadsheets or whatever it is? And we found there was a huge gap there, that there was a real opportunity for us. And that's now being probably, I'm a little early here, but that's probably going to start to work into our strategy going forward, that we have a bigger role to play in the professional lives of our members to help them do a better job for their employers and where they serve. So I do think there's some real things. And then for us, digital advertising bloomed. And a lot of other things along that line just took off. We're all much more comfortable in that space.
That's what we saw, the corporate sponsorships and all of that really came through. And I think that was a really great thing for the organization that we work with. There was also some reimagining of real estate space because of everybody being remote. Like, how can we monetize our building and get more people using it, but maybe just for collaboration spaces and those kinds of things. So, we saw a lot of organizations really rethinking, the use of their real estate, some maybe even thinking of selling it, and that would increase their, reserve, but also just, like I said, reimagining how it could be used. And I think just the innovation, the opportunity for innovation during this time of thinking outside the box has been, huge. And from the management teams to the board, I think have all contributed to that.
Right. And I would add, the sponsorships, sponsorships from people that normally aren't typical sponsors. Right. For example, we got a really, the biggest steel manufacturer in the US has never been a partner of ours. And through COVID, and they're looking for channels as well as us looking for channels, we forged this partnership. They're now one of our biggest sponsors and supporters. And they weren't in the mix pre-COVID. So, thinking about different partnerships and how do you do that? And what value do you bring to them and they bring to you, instead of just, going to the consulting firms that we normally did, for example.
Right. And the audiences are they reach more people in the virtual environment. Like I said, more people attend because they can't necessarily travel, take off work, for the day or two meetings, but being remote, and having the sessions recorded, they can view the content later. And so the sponsors, they still get their monies, they get what they pay for.
Very good, thank you. So another question came from Carrie Harton. Would also love to hear if anyone sees unique M&A opportunities or places where they are looking for financial partners in some of your products and offerings. First of all, I'll let the audience add to that question as well, but I'm going to speak to it because I'm wearing AMP, which is a product of a merger. So now that merger started long before, probably 2 years before COVID really hit us hard. But I think all of us recognize that it was a good thing for us to have that in place as we came through COVID. We were stronger because we came through it, and we're stronger together. And I am a big believer that as the association industry, we need to have a coming together. There's just way too many of us and too many small ones. And when you've got a lot of small entities, none of them are really strong. But also, we're all hitting those sponsors up, and the members have to be members of multiple organizations and all the things that go with that. So I think I'm going to call it partnering opportunities, because merger and acquisition sounds so business-like, and I think it's a little off-putting. But the idea of partnering and finding ways to come together with other organizations that do what we do, or to look for, there are some acquisitions in the sense of maybe there's even for-profit companies or something that makes sense to bring in. Is ASCE looking at any of that? Or Tracy, are you seeing any of that activity in your clients?
I think ASC is always looking for that. I think with COVID, we weren't focusing on it as much, but I can tell you from financial partners in the question and products and offerings. One of the things that we've made money on over the years, and it's a changing paradigm, is life insurance. The actuary of our profession and our safety focus, we always did really well in that. And, you couldn't buy better life insurance plus our cost of membership than you could get on the open market. Somebody who's 30 doesn't care about that. They just don't. And so we got into student loan repayment and refinancing, which is just beginning, but figured, younger members have terrible student loan issues, right? And so that's a way to potentially be able to get them to come on board, because there's a fiscal benefit to them. So that's like one example of something we've looked at as far as an offering that's very different than what we've looked at before. And we actually, the assistant treasurer as of this fiscal year is the chair of the subcommittee for revenue enhancement. And I was asked to do that with then President Guna as co-chair, and then kind of floated over to really put some crazy ideas to whiteboard and see fiscally whether we can make money at that and whether we can monetize that. So we're looking at that regularly to see what we can do different.
Tracy, are you seeing anything in your client? Are you seeing an uptick in wanting to use either reserves or for acquisitions, or seeing partnering or coming together as organizations?
I haven't seen that specifically, but that is a big reason of having those reserves. And so I think most of the organizations that we work with, they're always on the lookout, as Maria said, for the right partner, the right opportunity to come together.
The session right before this was on data and using data. And that's the other thing that we're hearing from our members. Our organizations have so much data and information about the industries we serve, the professions that our members are in, and how do you turn that around to monetize it, and then make it available in a useful way is, I think, another big opportunity. I'm going to take, because there was a question actually asked of me and saying, okay, so I talked about the professional skills and knowledge. Where are we going to get that? I tell you, the first place we're looking is within our own staff. So I have an incredibly talented CFO. I have an incredibly talented chief talent officer. I've got business development people. We have a lot of knowledge just within our staff that we can share. And then my intent would be to partner with other associations like us sitting around here who specialize in those areas. The last thing I want to do is go try to create it new. That makes no sense to me at all. But if I can partner with the American Marketing Association to help my members become better marketers, or look for ways like that. I already said we're not creating anything new. The information's out there. We're just making it accessible and sharing the knowledge. And like I said, draw on you've got expertise inside our own teams. That's just amazing. And a lot of it is very applicable to the industries we serve. So,
right.
You know, Bob, to that comment, as you were talking, it made me think of this. So one of the things that we launched a few years back is Future World Vision. And it's basically, you know, like a fully immersive virtual reality of contemplating what's in the future. And we've been funding it a little bit at a time and haven't found that marquee sponsor because COVID wouldn't let us. And so one of the concerns that came to us from the academicians, as I'm looking at that question, was that civil engineering professors were having a real hard time with reaching out and touching their students. You know, lectures on some of the stuff they have to lecture is bad enough when it's face to face, and then you're putting them behind a computer, and you know, it's just not as engaging. It's also not as engaging on the other side, having seen my granddaughter who's a kindergartner trying to do kindergarten remote. Let me tell you, there's nothing good about that. And anyway, so they were asking for product, and we needed to have some money to continue the stream to be able to develop this as we're looking for that marquee sponsor. And so we did a curriculum based on that product that we could then roll out to the universities. A whole lot of us, like I bought one license for younger professionals at the company, and I bought one for my alma mater to be able to use in their classrooms. And so it gave us it solved the problem with, you know, non-exciting coursework virtually. It solved the problem of giving us some funding in the interim. And now we've got this whole base of people who've seen it that are really excited about it, that really can push it out to the greater world. So this was like, clearly, what do? We have a COVID problem in 3 different dimensions, and one thing solved a bunch of those.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So what role did the strategic plan play in your organizations in COVID? And then now that you're coming out, how are you resetting your strategic plan? How does that fit with the management of the reserves?
What we saw with our clients, that especially those that had just updated their strategic plans before COVID, you know, they served as a guidepost, but really nothing tests a strategic plan like a global pandemic, right? So, you know, what we saw is that these words on a page became tangible actions, you know, for many of our clients. And, you know, if you think about, you know, membership development, like all of a sudden meetings now are more accessible globally. You know, as we talked about, you know, students can get engaged more. All of these things were part of the strategic plans, but now they had to happen. You know, improving employee communication, like that happened like overnight, as you know, the communication with the teams going remote increased. So, you know, that's where we've seen it. You know, in terms of the plans that were already in place, it just, you know, accelerated the action of the plan.
Tracy, it's interesting you said that. So at AMP, we, I don't know, a couple months in, I actually, at one of those board meetings, we had the board together, I made the recommendation to suspend the work on the strategic plan. Now, when I said that, that didn't mean we suspended the strategic plan. We suspended the reporting out, the creating of information to be sent and all of that, because that was taking time from my staff where they needed to spend it in changing in-person courses to online courses, et cetera. And I look back on it, I didn't really suspend the strategic plan. What we did is we outran the strategic plan. We implemented in weeks what was planned to be done in years, because we were slow to change and people don't like change. And so much of the implementation wasn't that the technology wasn't ready or the capability or the skill on staff. It was getting our customers and the market ready for these new things. And all of a sudden that got turned totally upside down. So I had to change my language. I didn't suspend the strategic plan. Our staff and everybody ran way beyond what it was. And now we're resetting. So, yes.
Right. So we, ASCE, you know, we have the strategic plan, but like you said, Bob, just to piggyback off what you said, we had the strategic plan, but COVID had forced us to accelerate to like you say, use the gifts and talents on our staff so that we could thrive in the environment that we were forced to be in. So, and especially in the financial area, you know, I never, before COVID, no one would have told me that the finance staff could work 100% remote.
Yeah.
We had to be in the office to do the financials and to do all the financial work. But if COVID has proven different, and one good thing is our IT department is, like Maria had said, we had already started to do some things remotely. So we already had the resources in place. So when our CEO said, okay, well, we're forced to close down, there was no hiccup. We were ready.
Yeah, it's true. We literally on Friday were in the office, or Thursday in the office, Thursday night sent out the email, and Monday everybody was working from home.
Right.
The worst hiccup we had, and I suffered from it, was our local internet systems weren't ready for the amount of people who are now working from home, and so it was slow. There were interruptions, but that was the AT&Ts or the Xfinities or whatever. Tracy, there's a question specifically for you. Tracy, are you seeing different industry benchmarks needed for reserves now that we've gone through the pandemic and organizations are wanting to make bigger strategic investments? So is the philosophies changing of how we invest?
Well, it's certainly kind of a paradigm shift in a way, right? And so it hasn't necessarily trickled down to the, benchmarks that we're seeing that we work with, but certainly the whole vision of how do you use reserve, what are the reserves for? And of course, it has to be in alignment with the mission. And then what is the mission? Has the mission changed, or has it just been the process of getting the mission out, to the members and to the, global societies? So that's been more of what we've seen. We are seeing some interest in doing some kind of innovation funds to help support, the particular industries. And that would come out of the reserves and fund some of those more innovative areas that are, done within the scientific communities. Also just making sure that there are enough in those operating reserves, and should things be moved back in, some from the long-term reserve to replenish the short-term reserve. So those are the things that we're seeing right now.
Very good. Okay, so I had a text from one of our colleagues, and I'll withhold the name, and you'll understand why. So are you, Tracy, this is for you. Are you seeing anybody beginning to show interest or investigate cryptocurrency as an investment strategy?
There's a lot of discussion, put it that way. We've had clients say, well, we've got, members and donors that may want to, donate through cryptocurrency. So right now what we're working on is a methodology. They haven't had anybody say, actually, hey, we want to do this tomorrow, but we're working on a process to enable that to happen. We're also obviously studying the area very closely in terms of the, is it valid to put into, these type of reserve portfolios? And of course, it's very important at that point to go back and look at the mission, look at the risks, how much of a reserve fund could you risk in this, relatively new area? And is it even allowed within the IPS? So there's a lot of policies and procedures and things that have to go on kind of behind the scenes as we're looking at opportunities, in that area. We certainly have a lot of clients, that are on these committees and boards that have done it on their own, but at this point we haven't, added that into the, to the portfolios at this time.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's bubbling out there for us. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I don't have any in my own personal investments either. So it's going to be one we're going to learn a lot about. Okay, we're getting a little close on time, but there are a couple questions I want to ask. Maria, I'd like to ask you, so you're a volunteer on the organizations, and we've got a room here full of staff folks who support the volunteers in their organizations. As a volunteer, particularly as a treasurer, what is it that we do or could do or should do for you, or you wouldn't want to see go away, ASC is doing for you today, that makes your job easy, you're more capable to fulfill your role? Because let's be honest, as a volunteer, you have limited time, limited resource that you can spend on this. How can we do a better job when it comes to financials for our treasurers and finance committees and boards?
I think you have to have a great relationship with the CFO and the controller, first of all, and that requires a lot of hand-to-hand combat, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of discussion. The other issue is that, and and I'll say it as a volunteer, there's a whole lot of board members that don't understand their fiduciary responsibility and do not engage at the level that they probably should. And so one of the things that I did is kind of a scared straight program. Okay. ASCE is incorporated in New York State. The Attorney General has guidelines for the fiduciary responsibilities. And they're not as soft as, for example, our chief counsel would do with board orientation. It's like you don't want to scare people straight. I, on the other hand, want people to understand that they, just because there's directors and officers insurance in an organization doesn't mean you're personally not going to be named. And so you have to do some things to prepare yourself as a volunteer. And so I think that partnership, I think that message coming from a staffer is a little too threatening, but from a volunteer, it's like, look, I have an umbrella policy for all my board work, and it's cheap insurance, and I get counsel if it happens. Having been in the public sector for 10 of my 40 years in the business, I used to get sued all the time for everything, right? And so you kind of get used to it. I don't know if everybody has that experience in their, day life. And so it's kind of a preparatory thing. So what I did is I sent the whole board what the Attorney General's guidance was. And that they should pay attention to it, and that I'd be happy to discuss it further. So there's, you have to understand there's things that come better from a volunteer than from a staffer. And so who says what to whom and how is part of that partnership to be able to move the ball. And, quite frankly, my CFO at ASCE was horribly uncomfortable with me doing the quiz for bourbon and money, right? But I put it up and people really enjoyed it. It was a fun way to get through a dry topic. So those are kind of examples of things that you can do, that you really have to forge that partnership if it's going to be successful. And, especially when times are tough and there's a lot of bad news that goes around, and you have to find a way to lift up from that. It's really important to have that partnership.
Very good. Okay, we're getting down to the last couple minutes. We have one more poll that we'd like to do, and it has to do with the payroll protection plan. So Sarah, if you'll pop that up, and if the audience would take the opportunity to fill that out. As you are answering this question, I am going to take the moment to thank our panelists for joining us. Maria, particularly you as a volunteer, just to give another hour of your time. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And what
I feel like I'm on payroll.
You're amazing. I have an awesome treasurer, and I have an awesome finance committee, but you would be welcome to join ours anytime. So you've done a great work.
You
Tracy,
can't have her, Bob.
I can't have her? Okay. Tracy, thank you for your time. The work Townley's done for our associations really has prepared us for what came and what's going to come. And Jenny, thank you for your time and demonstrating the relationship, a positive relationship with our volunteers and the work, how ASCE comes together to work. So the poll is up. It says, did your organization receive a payroll protection loan? And if so, was the loan forgiven? And substantial number of us did receive them, which is great. And a substantial have had theirs forgiven already. There's still a few out there that took it but have not had it forgiven. So, but that's great to see. And it's great to see that the government is forgiving quickly. I know for us, I was surprised how easy it was to have it forgiven. I expected a lot more hoop jumping and challenging and, trying to twist us around a little bit around it. And it was quite easy to be forgiven. So,
right. Yeah. Same here. We prepared our information. We, like Maria said, we received one PPP, that one's forgiven. The second one, I'm currently working on the information to submit to have that one forgiven as well. And to the organizations that received the PPO and have not having it forgiven, make sure that you pursue that, because the gathering of the information you can get it together, and the government will forgive it. Like Bob said, it's easier than you think. So.
Yeah, we prepared this huge stack. We were ready for all the questions, and we got like one question, and it was, confirm the address or something like that. It was very simple. So, all right. Well, we are right up against 1:45. I want to thank you all again for joining us, and for the audience for being here. And we had a great turnout, and thank you. And I enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Oh, there is a sign up. I need to mention this. Our next panel is the future of meetings, which, by the way, I think we started to touch on that a little bit when you start talking about what do new products and services look like post-pandemic and how that's changing. So I know that will be a powerful session. And then join us for the happy hour, where you can network with your peers who are in the same role or similar roles to you. So thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.